Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight we're going to talk about a number of different issues. Tonight is October 31st of 2016. This is going to be our Halloween show and our pre-apocalypse show. I'm sorry, I think we have one more before the apocalypse of the November 8th elections. The choice between the fascist Donald Trump and the psychopathic cackling witch, warmonger, and the destruction of us all, bringing about the fiery inferno of judgment upon the world with Hillary Clinton, who must absolutely never be president, but unfortunately it looks like that is the direction we are moving into. So we'll talk a little bit about the elections. We'll talk about things you need to look at on the march forward. So before we do, I want to draw your attention to the fact that BrandonTurbeville.com has a lot of new information and material on it. There are a lot of new interviews. I've done interviews with Cassius Camarampi of Era of Wisdom, Heather Callahan of Natural Blaze, Terry Bain of Voices Network, the old Occupy groups, and they've started their shows back up at Voices Network, also with Sam Richards. All that information is up there. I've done interviews with Tasnim News out of Iran, and a couple of other places out of Iran that I've done interviews with. All of that stuff is up there on the website, BrandonTurbeville.com. Of course, keep checking ActivistPost.com, NaturalBlaze.com, and eraofwisdom.org to keep track of my work specifically. Now, let's take a look at some of the things we need to address quickly. Again, coming up on the elections, it's important to have a very good idea of what we are looking at. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I ended the show and the discussion by mentioning the marijuana referendums or referendi that were coming up in November on the ballot. 9 states are going to have marijuana on the ballot. That's Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Maine, Massachusetts, Montana, and North Dakota. If you live in one of those states, you need to get out and vote. You need to get out and participate in that. This is going to be important. Most of these bills are merely minute, very small steps in the right direction, barely registering on the scale. But there are a couple that are incredibly important, because this is going to either just regulate marijuana just like alcohol, basically move us in the direction that we want to go, which is full decriminalization. Now, we're not interested in regulation. We're not interested in the government intervention in a plant. We eventually what we want is the ability to buy marijuana pretty much anywhere, everywhere, at any time, and be able to grow it, carry it, sell it, possess it, smoke it, whatever you want to do with it, because it's a plant, and that's the way you want to see it. If you're in a free country, you should be able to consume, possess, sell a plant if you so desire, and that's what we are moving towards. The promotion, not just of medical marijuana, but recreational marijuana, even in small increments and small steps in the right direction, are important, because it shows the unfortunately brainwashed masses that it's not the end of the world if adults can consume plants. So we want to encourage people to get out and vote on that issue. Now, the presidential election, there's not much to comment on. We have no choices between the main two, right? Trump and Clinton. Of course, Clinton should never be allowed within 100 miles of the White House. It's a national security danger. It's a danger to the world if she is allowed that close a range to the White House, so she must be stopped. The other elections that we have, none of this should be taken necessarily as a personal endorsement or as anyone that I agree with 100%. I just want to make it clear that when we mention candidates, it's only as the potential for something you might be interested in. This is not a personal endorsement. So we hate Clinton, and Trump is dangerous. Trump, with his obsession with law and order, police worship, military worship, nationwide stop and frisk, all that is concerning, and we can't support people who have no more respect for the Constitution, civil rights, human rights, etc. than that. Then we have the third parties. There's a number of third-party candidates running across the country. Some of them are only on the ballot in one state, two states. I'm sorry. This is only a protest vote if it's absolutely necessary. That's pointless. If someone is not, it's not physically possible for them to win the presidency. It's not worth mentioning. Then the third parties, though, we have Jill Stein and Gary Johnson. Normally, the Libertarian candidate would be somewhat better, would be more Ron Paul-ish in that sense. But instead you have Gary Johnson, the prison privatizer in chief. And this is a guy who can barely really summon up a human emotion on television. He gets very angry, but it's obviously staged. It's like he's attempting to act. We saw him becoming very angry with reporters a while back because they asked him a question about his tax policy, which is a ridiculous tax policy, but of course the reporter was attempting to drum up support for people like Hillary, the typical mainstream journalist method. So Gary Johnson has to be looked at for what he is, and this is a guy who has bragged about privatizing prisons, eliminating a number of different services for the people in his state. Not necessarily a great choice, but certainly if you're going to vote in the presidential election, if it's Trump or Clinton, then Johnson looks better. Obviously, Jill Stein, of course, looks better. There are problems with Jill. She has Ajamo Baraka in the vice presidential post. She is not good on guns. That is a major weakness. And I would encourage people in the Green Party, and I'd encourage people on that side of the fence to realize how stupid your gun policy is, not just because of the constitutional rights issue, not just because of civil rights, but just for your own self-preservation, right? You have no idea how many people out in the mainstream of America, right? The average person who would look at your platform and love a lot of it, high wages, that sort of thing, the economics issue, the issue of not getting involved in foreign entanglements, all that's great. Then they see your ridiculous anti-gun policy, and the only reason that anti-gun policy exists is so you can find the Democrats or the angry Democrats who might be willing to vote for a third party. You make them feel more comfortable with your anti-gun policy. And I have news for you. Real liberals aren't going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Liberals don't vote for Hillary Clinton, just like libertarians don't vote for people who like nationwide stop and frisk. Real liberals don't vote for Hillary, so forget trying to bring make yourself attractive to the Hillary Clinton crowd. It's not going to happen. That is a personality cult. Drop the gun policy, and you'll find that more people find your platform interesting. This is something that hindered Bernie Sanders, of course. If Bernie Sanders would have been pro-gun, he would have attracted a lot more support, especially in the South and in the rural areas. But instead, they go after this leftist, communistic style policy of eliminating gun ownership. It's stupid. But in this election, if you're going to be voting, then you should be voting third party. Now that we can say with certainty. You should be voting third party. Neither Trump nor Clinton should get your vote. And of course, Clinton we are viewing as the worst possible choice in this race. Without a doubt, she is the person who is the greatest evil. Now, we want to talk about some platforms. I guess we should mention one of them, which is the hurricane that we had here, and we're still trying to recover here in South Carolina. Water, wind, all of it has taken power outages that have lasted for weeks. People are still getting, well, actually, I think everybody's power might be on who has a home left, but this is several weeks after. So basically, a Category 1 hurricane has now crippled the area. And this is an example of the crumbling infrastructure of the United States and what we need to do in order to move forward. We have an article by Michael Snyder, who tends to cover the disasters and the effects of potential disasters. And he has an article that says, if one storm can turn D.C. dark for several days, what would a massive EMP burst do? And in that article, he goes and talks about the aftermath of a derecho that went across the Midwest and South, and it had millions of people without power for almost a week. And that happened here in South Carolina, and we were without power for about a week just because of some strong winds. And what people should realize is that the American power grid is not so much a grid as a patchwork of various methods of energy, energy provisions that are just strung together in this haphazard fashion. And this is not a way for the American people who rely so much on electricity to receive power in the 21st century. And to top it all off, the vast majority of power is provided by private utility companies, and their only reason for existing is to make a profit. And that's the case for all private companies. But the cost of the utilities provided by these companies is generally much more expensive, and the services are generally less efficient than the areas in which power is provided by the municipality. Completely aside from the argument whether or not to privatize utilities or government-owned utilities are more desirable, the fact that in the 21st century, an approaching storm, winter storm, windstorm, hurricane, derecho, whatever it is, that should not signal the loss of power for days and weeks. In most parts of the country, the American power grid is strung together with temporary power cables that actually rest upon temporary poles. It's incredibly temporary. The method of power connectivity might have served us well early enough on, but times have progressed and our technology and services should progress along with them. Power lines strung on overloaded wooden poles, that's no longer a sustainable option for transferring power in this century. We need to begin to work on investigating methods to bury power cables and bury them underground so that falling limbs, that other accidents and so forth can no longer cause widespread power outages. Compared to the constant maintenance these lines require in the mode that they're in today, a project that is well within the range of cost effectiveness when you look at it from a long-term perspective is burying the lines. And the elimination of worry over all too common weather-related power outages would be well worth the investment from both the point of view of the municipality, the power company, and especially the consumer. Now, in other locations, we have places where the power lines are already buried underground, and these people are fortunate enough to live in these areas, are virtually immune to ice storms and snowstorms and wind storms. Much of the East Coast was plunged into the cold and dark, while these people are able to sympathize from the warmth of their own home and watch all of this unfold on the TV. So, of course, it's true that burying power cables does not necessarily mean that they'll be immune to all forms of damage and that power outages will no longer exist, but the vulnerability of power services to damage will be greatly reduced. And by reducing the amount of outages resulting from the damage, that's now considered business as usual. So we need to change that. The only legitimate argument against burying the power cables outside of some very unique, specific environmental concerns or some areas where the ground is too wet, for instance, this is the element of cost. And a project like that would indeed cost a large sum of money, but the financing is readily available in the form of interest-free credit as provided by a nationalized Federal Reserve or a partially nationalized Federal Reserve working in the interest of the American people. So we could obtain the financing in this way. This type of financing should be included as part of the overall revamping and rebuilding of the national infrastructure, an immediate necessity that we need to pursue without delay. The National Revitalization Program can be accomplished by nationalizing the Federal Reserve and then issuing the required amount of money through 0% interest credit to either private companies or local governments. If the Federal Reserve can cough up trillions of dollars of cheap credit for Wall Street, it can cough up an equal amount for the American people and their infrastructure. Even better, a nationalized Federal Reserve can immediately begin to buy up state, local, and municipal bonds at 0% interest plus 100-year maturity requirements. That's a century bond. This would provide the financing to bury the power cables and free the U.S. from the ever-increasing failures of the current power system. And it would allow the governments to pay for the developments with no fear of financial foreclosure or indebtedness to a private banking cartel. And I would encourage you to read my article, Nationalize the Federal Reserve, to get more details on this concept, because we need to move forward into the 21st century, not back. Now, in the discussion of moving forward, we need to talk about what people are going to be seeing on the ballot when they go to their local elections. And this is going to be more municipality-based, right? Cities, counties, that sort of thing. But I want to give you an idea of a basic platform that we're going to try to put out. The platform that we have on the 43 points is a national platform. This is the federal government. This is national policy. But a lot of people have asked, what can we do if it's a local election or a state election? And we've been trying to work on that. We've got some very basic ideas that we're going to get published, and that includes, of course, redirecting city police forces from focusing on the disastrous drug war and then focusing them on violent crime, theft, that sort of thing in your cities or towns, because not only does prosecuting the drug war create resentment toward police within the community, refocusing that energy would not only repair that distrust that's been growing over time, but it would do a lot to improve the attractiveness of the city by reducing the amount of crime. It would make the place much safer. Tax breaks to property owners, both residential and commercial, for improving and repairing their property. Currently, tax systems discourage improvements with a financial penalty. This method could also provide assistance to property owners that are willing to facilitate and work with the establishment of new or struggling local businesses. You could fine-tune those guidelines later so that they're fair for people who are already there. We could look into that at some point in the future. This would bring more businesses to the city and encourage innovation. So we hope that we can expand on that later. Physical cleanup. This is towns and cities where you have trash everywhere, tall grass, rain gutters so full that trees are growing in them, like Florence County, for instance. That's a sad state of affairs. It's not that expensive to remedy either. A fresh coat of paint, some pressure washing can do wonders, just like repairs of basic infrastructure, making the city more attractive, just encouraging and improving the city centers. Eliminating blue laws, that's something more in the South. People outside of the South might be a little confused as to what that is. That's essentially religious dictatorship, because the Christian community is upset that you can buy beer on Sundays. They are taking a page out of the Al-Qaeda book and demanding that everybody else respect or obey their religious dictates. So we want to eliminate that. Separation of church and state, that's a good thing. Now, bringing the cities and counties into the 21st century, especially for smaller areas. Just because you're a smaller area does not mean that you should lack transportation or available internet connections. We're going to try to work on some ideas there too. And of course, jumping on major trends such as organic food, local businesses. There's a way to do that with maker spaces. This is a way, an end run until NAFTA is fixed, until the trade agreements are fixed. This is sort of a Band-Aid on this hemorrhage of jobs, and it's a way to improve the city and county. We want to see the elimination of overbearing and unnecessary ordinances and codes, and, of course, responsible spending in the midst of all this. So we're going to clarify a lot of these points in the future as we put this platform out, but I wanted to throw them out there so that you would have an idea of what to look at when you're looking at local elections. And if your local candidates aren't addressing these issues, then ask them. And if they can't answer those questions, or if they don't answer those questions to your satisfaction, then go to somebody else or write your name in, or consider running yourself in the next election. So tonight what I'm going to do is, for the rest of the show, we are going to air an interview that I did with Heather Callahan of Natural Blaze regarding the food system in the Middle East after I traveled there several weeks ago, and I came back, and there's a lot of stuff. It's not just about food, it's about the culture, and it's about the power that Monsanto has in certain areas and is trying to have in others, in places like Syria. So we hope you enjoy this interview. Next week we'll be back discussing the international situation in Syria. We'll be discussing some platform points and whatever else happens to be in the news. We'll obviously be talking about the impending apocalypse of the Clinton coronation. So ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoy the interview. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week. Stay tuned for the Natural Blaze interview.
This is Heather Callahan of naturalblaze.com, and I'm coming to you with this podcast today because I have an interview with a very special guest. His name is Brandon Turbeville, and he just got back from the Middle East, and I'm going to let him tell you about everything he experienced there. I really want to bring his perspective to you today so that you can really get a great idea of what the food system and other very important parts of lifestyle are like in a different country, because sometimes in the United States we can get a little tunnel vision about the way things are here, and it's really broadens our horizons when we get to experience or hear from somebody else about something that might be entirely different. Without further ado, I want to welcome our guest, Brandon Turbeville. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Heather. Thanks for having me on.
I'm very happy to have you on today. I just wondered if maybe first you could tell us what you went through recently, what you experienced, and where you went.
Yeah, well, basically we took a trip to the Middle East, and the goal ultimately was to make it into Syria to take a look at the situation on the ground in Syria, all across the country, and the humanitarian crisis, the ability to speak to Syrians themselves and hear what they had to say on the ground in Syria. Unfortunately, there were some issues, logistical issues, that prevented us from actually making it into Syria. But we managed to stay in Lebanon for about 2 weeks and travel all over the country, from the north, south, east, west. We really hit most places in Lebanon. And in that trip, we were able to not only experience the Middle East, but we were able to speak to the Lebanese people. We were able to speak to the Syrians who had come over the border for a visit or for business, and we were able to speak to a lot of Syrian refugees. And Syrian refugees are aplenty in Lebanon, particularly in places like Beirut, where they fled the Syrian conflict and come to Lebanon as refugees seeking asylum. So we had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people, and I think one of the other important aspects of this is that the opinions that we were able to gather from the Syrian people were people in Lebanon. so some of the criticisms that you'll get is whenever you talk to Syrians in Syria is that, oh, well, they can't speak their mind because they're afraid of the Syrian government. And speaking to them in Lebanon, however, you don't have that criticism that's available to the critics, because these individuals are not inside Syria. They're not, if they were under any threat of the Syrian government, they're not in any threat of the Syrian government in Lebanon, because they are outside of the country. They're outside of the government reach. So that's why we value their opinion a great deal as well. And we could talk about what they had to say about the crisis and all, but I think you wanted to focus on the food and agricultural issues. So maybe we can come back around to that later.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love for, I'm sure our listeners, I can already feel like there's probably wheels turning hearing you say that, because we have such a different perspective portrayed on the media. So please feel free to come back to that. And yes, we might want to come back to that and see how it all ties in together. That's really fascinating. Because the first thing I wanted to ask you was, I wanted the listeners and readers to get a picture of the atmosphere there where you stayed, since you got to experience so much of it, and the meals found where you stayed, like what a typical meal was like. And would it be along the lines of a Mediterranean diet? Did you have to eat a lot of processed food while you were there? Was the breakfast like a Denny's Grand Slam breakfast, steak, eggs, 5 pounds of bacon, or was it entirely different?
It was entirely different. It's Mediterranean diet, definitely. Lebanon is, on the Mediterranean. Syria is on the Mediterranean. This diet is it's amazing in terms of taste. But you ask about breakfast, for instance. Breakfast isn't anything that resembles an American breakfast. You'll get on an average breakfast some flatbread with cheese and this dairy spread. It's made from milk, and you'll get olives and tomatoes and cucumbers and perhaps some boiled eggs, or maybe in a fried egg or something like that. And when you first look at this platter, it's very rich in flavor and texture, and you look at it and everything, and you think, maybe this isn't gonna fill me up, because this isn't a giant omelet with hash browns and bacon and toast and all that. But it's very filling, and it's energizing. And most of the food is like that in the Middle East. You ask about processed foods. I don't really remember coming across any. I'm sure there's processed food in a convenience store, but in terms of what we ate, we didn't really eat any processed food, and there was no need to. It was very different. I would say, first in terms of taste, the food was just bursting with flavor. This is something I think Westerners are not even accustomed to, because we think of food here in America. That's what I can really compare it to the most. Food that's flavorful here in America versus food in the Middle East, for instance, it doesn't really compare, mainly because of the ingredients, in my estimation. But most of the ingredients that we ate were fresh, and some of them were nice restaurants. Most of them were average restaurants and street food and that sort of thing. And it was very fresh. It was bursting with flavor. I mean, you can't really describe the amount of flavor that this food has. You really need to try it for yourself to see. Going to maybe a shawarma place in the States, or some Middle Eastern restaurant in the States doesn't do it justice. It's not the same. It's just the taste is just it's explosive, and whenever you eat it. In terms of ingredients, what can I say? The food is so much smoother and cleaner in terms of digestion and how you feel after you eat it. You eat a big meal over here, and you feel like you're about to go into a coma for a few hours, and I'm talking about average meal, not 100% organic meal or anything, but you feel like you're about to fall asleep, or there's intestinal discomfort, or something like that. In the Middle East, you eat a big meal and you feel energized, and you don't feel intestinal discomfort. In fact, I ate so much food while I was there because it was affordable, and I gorged myself on food and lost weight. And that's, you can eat smaller portions here in the U.S. and gain so much more weight. And it wasn't because of exercise. I only, put out as much effort in terms of exercise as I do living here, but the food was just different in terms of ingredients and various, illnesses that people might suffer with seem to dissipate, or at least, decrease in terms of how bad a person is suffering from it after about a week or so of eating this food. It's just a smoother food. It's not processed, not GMO and all that kind of stuff. And you feel it. You can feel it whenever you eat a meal, and you have the portion sizes are about the same size as the U.S., and you don't really need as much food. That's the other thing. The food, you eat a sandwich in Lebanon, for instance, and you're good for a few hours. People can eat over here. They can eat a foot-long sub from Subway, for instance, and then be hungry 45 minutes afterwards. And in Lebanon, you could eat a sandwich that's only half the size and be full for hours. And by estimation, that's probably because there's actual nutrition in the sandwich that's getting in Lebanon, and where there's food from Aramark and at Subway, it's just nutritionally devoid if it's not GMO and actually harmful to you. So, in terms of the diet, I hope I answered your question. I just kind of rambled, but that's what I've noticed. The food is just different there. It's smoother, it's lighter. You're going to notice a lack of health issues that are related to the food. You're energized after you eat it. You're more full when you eat it. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Wow, that's amazing. Sure, a lot of us listening to this are going to be quite envious, or possibly have our curiosity piqued that we can't actually seem to pull off something like that in the United States. For the most part, I mean, a lot of people are trying, and they try very restrictive diets, and it's just so difficult. It's difficult to lose weight. I got a sense that there was a lot of whole foods there, but it's still amazing that you were able to have all that flavor without everything being doused in MSG as it is here, which is like, it kills brain cells. Some people have been able to reverse health problems by cutting out all MSG from the diet, and it is no easy feat to do that. So it's amazing that everything there seemed to be so effortless. I take it there weren't many obese people there.
No, if you saw somebody who was overweight, it was rare. You could point it out. I didn't see. I can't think of anyone that I saw that was obese. And if somebody was obese, it was literally from either there was a health problem or there was simply vast overeating.
Which is like very different from the United States, where a person could be obese or morbidly obese for any number of reasons that may not even have to do with overeating food. Sometimes just the hormonal issues and the thyroid, and again, the food additives and everything here. So that's really amazing. You touched on genetically engineered ingredients or GMO foods. They don't really do that over there. I mean, could you sense a stark difference between, did it feel like the food was GMO free? Did you get to hear from anybody about that, or did you learn about what they do over there agriculturally?
I'm not an expert on agriculture, and certainly not Middle Eastern agriculture. What I would say in Lebanon, there are no laws that ban GMOs directly. So the idea is that they are, I would imagine, present, but I didn't see that they, anywhere that they were. from talking to the people, there's a pride in the food production of the people in the area, and talking about their reactions to discussing different types of food. You didn't get the idea that they were very, very open to producing these types of GMO products and so forth. Most of the stuff that I could see was produced locally, and I mean very locally. There are sandwich shops. If you're a meat eater, you could go to a sandwich shop, and your meat is literally hanging there on a hook, and they just go cut a piece off of it and then go cook it. And it's not shipped in from some other country or either some other location in Lebanon. It's right down the street where all this stuff is produced. In Syria, however, GMOs are banned. It's illegal to cultivate genetically modified organisms in Syria, and Bashar al-Assad passed that law back in 2012, I believe. And they weren't present in Syria before then, but it was a law that was passed. So no GMOs in Syria, period. And I think that's important because that brings us to the question of why all this is happening in Syria. And I guess I should touch on that now so people have an idea of what's going on over there. But essentially, the U.S. is funding proxy fighters, terrorists, to overthrow the Syrian government for a number of different purposes. And of course, part of it is geopolitical, the interests that lie with Israel, and of course the strategic alliances that Syria has with Russia. And this is sort of the Shiite crescent or arc of influence, basically Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then Syria and Iran, and then of course you have the Russian interest. And this is a geopolitical chessboard and a march that's being moved forward that didn't begin with Syria and certainly not going to end with it. It's going to move on to Iran next and then on to a confrontation with Russia. So part of it is a geopolitical attack against Russia on the part of the Western powers, the United States and NATO. And then you have the issues like the Qatari pipeline that was supposed to go through Syria that was nixed by Assad in favor of the Russian pipeline, which of course would have given not just Russian oil companies money, but they would have given them leverage over Europe in terms of energy. But then you also have issues like this in terms of the GMOs. You have Syria that has a state-owned central bank. It's not part of the Anglo-European Wall Street, City of London financier alliance, the NATO Anglo-American hegemon. And you also have things like the lack of GMO foods. This is an example of how Syria is attempting to be its own nation, right? They're not knuckling under to NATO, to the West. They're not knuckling under to Wall Street or to big international corporations. When the United States invaded Iraq, one of the first things they did when they created essentially a puppet government was to force the Iraqis to use genetically modified foods. They brought Monsanto and a few others in and forced the Iraqis to use this GMO garbage. The Syrians banned the cultivation of GMOs. So you have a rejection of this system. And that's another reason that we see the Syrian government being targeted now by the Western powers. Again, I don't mean to go off on too big of a tangent, but that's important when you talk about GMOs. You can't really ignore the fact that big corporations like Monsanto aren't just using the market, or they aren't just using advertising techniques or business savvy. They're using the muscle of the U.S. government, Western powers, to force themselves on the people who don't want them to begin with. And that's what we're being seeing in Syria for the last 5 years.
Wow. That's incredible. That is very important how that all ties in. A lot of people say things like, if you want to beat Monsanto, use your dollars. Well, here, thanks to the background of information that you have, it's not always that simple. especially for other countries. I mean, it sounds like the corporations are intertwined with the government and reaping all these benefits that have nothing to do with consumer choice. So I'm really glad you shared that with our listeners, because that's oftentimes a missing puzzle piece when talking about natural health. I mean, I can't believe how vast this is. I'm really glad you shared that about the GMOs over there.
Well, I want to point out something else. I mean, yeah, it's not just voting with your dollars. I mean, there's many different ways that you have to approach this when you want to fight a corporation like Monsanto. It's part of it. Part of it is, of course, trying to fight by using your dollars elsewhere, or supporting other means of getting your food, buying non-GMO, organic, local, or as they say in Syria, food, as opposed to what they do here. But what you'll notice also is that there is, when you see people in this region, you'll notice that there's a life about them. It's kind of electric energy about the people that you see. There's not this lifeless zombie look on their faces like what you see over here. And that's not to beat down on the United States here. It's just fact. In fact, they notice it. When in Syria or Lebanon, they come across other people. They come across Russians, they come across Americans, they come across other people, and they will tell you that they noticed about people from the West, and meaning the United States, Western Europe mainly, that there is a lack of life in them. And that's not referring to their character, it's referring to the fact that they look unhealthy. They look tired, they look wiped out, and they look like they're just barely able to get by. Like there's just there's a lack of life in their eyes. And I've had people in Syria comment about that to me, about people from the West. And look at what we're fed. From day one, we're fed genetically modified foods, we're fed toxic chemicals, we're vaccinated. No wonder we look like that when we go out to places. But you don't see that in places where they don't have GMO foods and where they have, actually better practices in terms of sustenance.
That's so interesting that you bring that up about the life force, because there's a lot of natural health modalities that recognize that. Some of them call it chi. Some of them have different names for it. But there really is something recognizable in somebody else. And it definitely is not to bash the United States. And if anything, it's to talk about how we can help the people here, because it's not their choice. I mean, a lot of people look at somebody who has health problems and they blame that person. And I would say in the United States, it is not their fault. 9 times out of 10, it is not their fault, because anybody should be able to go to the store and get food and not be poisoned by that food, not be suppressed by the food. And, also historically speaking, metaphorically, the seed of people's emotions was in your belly, in the gut. And now we're finding out the gut-brain connection scientifically. And the food that we're eating in America is destroying our guts. And even something like ancient scripture, like your emotions were in your gut, and that was your intestinal fortitude. And if you wanted to fight a war, you needed a lot of intestinal fortitude. And it's just interesting to me that everything about our food seems to be designed to destroy the gut and give you a dampened mental cognitive activity. All of that would definitely suppress a person. That would suppress their personality. That would zap your energy, especially with hidden mystery health illnesses that seem to be plaguing Americans. What a shame that Americans can't have that simple. It's not supposed to be a luxury. Food is not supposed to be a luxury, but what a shame that they can't have that. What people in the Middle East apparently have, or at least they hopefully will get to keep if Monsanto doesn't move through and the United States doesn't force them to use those GMOs. What you were saying actually reminded me of when I first started getting into this. I went to a protest, in a peaceful one in Washington, D.C., and that was the first time I ever tried raw milk. And I am lactose either intolerant or low tolerance, and I tried raw milk on Capitol Hill and had absolutely no problems. And that's when it struck me, the energy of everyone around me. There were hundreds of people there, and there was not one obese person. The kids were robust. The people had color to their face. They all had boundless energy. It really sounds like what you're describing. And they were all getting their food completely organic, raised on a farm from these herd shares. And so that got me into raw milk, which I think is a life and energy-giving food. But in the United States, there's only a few states that allow the retail sale of raw, unpasteurized, fresh milk. A number of states allow people to have raw milk from the farm if the private buyers own a part of the cow. This is known as cow shares or herd shares. You have to go about it in this weird roundabout way to even be able to have raw milk if you're allowed to. Some of the states, it's just illegal. There's a lot of peaceful farmers in the United States who have been victims of government sting operations with arrests, spying, surveillance, threats of jail time, confiscation of personal property, and the destruction of all their food, all their fresh food. How does this compare? That's a crazy situation, but this happens in America. Now, how does that compare to Lebanon?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what their laws are in terms of milk, but interestingly enough, I actually did have this conversation with a Syrian who was in Lebanon. We were discussing different types of food because I was bragging on the fact that their food had so much taste and that I didn't feel like I was going to die after I ate it. And we got onto the subject of the food in the United States, and when I mentioned the fact that there was only a number of states where you could actually get milk from the cow, first it was puzzlement. All right, they were puzzled at what I was saying because they must have thought that somehow it got lost in translation. I couldn't be telling them that getting milk from a cow was illegal. But when they realized what I was saying, puzzlement turned into shock that in the United States, which always tells everybody that it's promoting freedom, that it's the freest country in the world, you never have a lack of hearing that the United States is the freest country in the world. But in this freest country, you can't get milk from a cow. You should have seen the look on their face. They were amazed that somebody would have even thought up a stupid enough law to have put it down on paper. You know, not even that it was illegal, but what kind of idiot would come up with a law like this? I don't know actually the laws even in Syria, but I do know that from the reaction of the Syrians that I was speaking to, it must be very plentiful. I think maybe in the cities you get pasteurized stuff and all that, but out in the rural areas you get real milk, and it could be a mixture of the two in the cities. But I honestly, it seemed to me to be obvious that you could get milk anywhere. In fact, I was told by Syrians that you could get regular milk. And again, when I was saying raw milk, as the Syrians would call it milk. You know, we have all these special terms because we eat a plethora of crap and toxic food. They don't have to do that. They just, if you want milk, you just go get real milk. If you want cheese, you get real cheese. You know, if you get bread, it's non-GMO bread, and it's fine. Here we have to have, 100% organic, gluten-free, local, grass-fed, all that kind of stuff. We have to have all these labels just to make sure that we're eating food that won't do us harm. That's the issue in Syria right now is not enough food. It's not the type of food. It's that there's not enough to go around. And that's a tragedy, but the type of food is incredibly nourishing and clean. And again, when you talk about the look of people, across the world, it was noticeable. When I came back from the Middle East, it's, to be out of the United States and then to come back in is an experience everybody should have in 2016 and 2017. It might open their eyes to a lot of different things. And when you're out, when we acclimate to things, while we're here, and then when you have a chance to decompress and be away and then come back to it, it it manifests itself. So when you have a chance to leave the United States and be around a whole country of other people who do look like they're largely healthy and full of life, and you come back to the United States where everybody looks so incredibly tired, the look would be, if somebody had been up for 24 hours and they had another 8 hours to go before they could get off of work, that look on their face like they're just trying to push through, and really struggling to do it. That's the look that most Americans have. It's just exhaustion, and it's obvious that we're struggling as people. When I came back, trying to acclimate myself to American food again. I didn't get sick in Lebanon. See, that's the other thing other people will say is when you go to these types of countries, you're going to get sick and there's all kinds of stomach issues. Well, no, when I was fine. In fact, anything that I may have had to deal with got better. But when I came back to the United States, the very first meal on American soil, I was not handling it well. In fact, it took me about 3 days to get acclimated to the American diet again, and where I just could barely eat anything and keep it down. And it wasn't anything coming back from Lebanon. It was American food, and that should tell you something about the quality of food.
Wow, having to have an acclimation period that's longer than jet lag just to get back to the American diet. Wonders never cease. Like you were kind of touching on before about like people who go to other countries and they find out they can eat the food. I mean, I've heard that celiacs or people who are almost celiac or gluten sensitive or have chronic health issues can literally go to other countries like Italy, let's say, and gorge on all the bread and noodles that they want, and they find out they have no problems all of a sudden. All the food that they aren't supposed to eat with their medical issue, that is no issues until they come back to the United States. So I'm assuming the same thing would happen to anyone traveling to the Middle East then.
Yeah, and obviously you have to be careful. I mean, you don't want to eat chicken if you see the restaurants warming it out in the sun in the street or something. But if you just go to an average restaurant, you don't have anything to worry about. And the food, again, if you order the food, I would tell anybody, if you're gluten intolerant and you travel to the Middle East, give it a chance. Just get some bread and see what happens. I have an idea you'll be fine. You don't have to worry about any of the quality of the food. It's the best food I've ever had, and I would recommend that people give it a shot. If you're, for the record, if you're allergic to something, don't do it. I don't want to get sued for that statement, but if you have intolerance and certain foods bother you, they're most likely not to bother you if you try it in a country like Syria where it's non-GMO or Lebanon where it's just not that prevalent.
Well, this has been an amazing, fascinating interview. Really get an eye-opening view of the Middle East. I mean, this is incredible. A lot of people would never have guessed any of that, what you said about the Middle East, thinking that they have less freedom or less access to things, and it looks like we're the ones who don't have as much access to real food or even like a real freedom of choice. So I guess what I would say is if there's anything that you want to leave our readers and listeners with, or maybe offer any suggestions about how we can maybe try to get more of that fresh, real food, keep it legal here, and maybe make sure that the United States doesn't and the allies don't force these people to give up their food freedom either.
Well, I think one of the first things people should do if they're worried about Syria, for instance, being forced to have Monsanto's GMO seeds, the American people or the individuals who are interested in preventing that from happening need to get active and help stop the war effort against Syria. If you don't want them to be forced to have GMO foods, you should stop the United States from bombing them into the Stone Age and funding proxy terrorists and overthrowing the Syrian government. That would be the first thing, because Syria is GMO-free. Global activists against GMOs have won in Syria. The battle now is to keep the U.S. and NATO and Israel and Saudi Arabia from going in and destroying it all. So that's what they need to do on that regard. By the way, when I say we talk to Syrians and Syrian refugees, 100% of them supported their government. 100% of them supported Bashar al-Assad. All of them, without qualification. And if the United States media is trying to convince people that the Syrian people support this so-called revolution, it's a lie. And in fact, I would encourage people to go back and look at my articles and maybe check out my book to see the nature of that so-called rebellion. But again, 100% of the people that we talked to supported Assad and supported the government. Even those individuals who may not have been big fans of Assad before the war are now 100% in favor of him. So as to what we can do here, I think we're getting hit from a number of different avenues, and shopping with our dollars is important. Growing your own gardens, if you can, is important. Supporting local food, organic food, farmers markets, etc. All that's important stuff, but that's not the be-all, end-all. And supporting labeling efforts, that's important too, although the federal government just tried to shut that down and has largely done so with success, which is why I've always argued that we should be arguing in favor of a ban and not just labeling. So you take a number of different avenues, which is to pull out of the system in one aspect and pull your money away from these big corporations, but also to fight them head on and to get aggressive and say, not only are we going to pull out of your system, but we are going to try to stop you. We're going to try to ban GMOs. Aside from the human health concerns, it's extremely dangerous to the environment. So yeah, get involved politically on the government level, get involved in terms of demonstrations and public education. But also I want to highly encourage people to start connecting with one another and building united fronts. You can go online and look at all these different organizations. There's, March Against Monsanto. I think there's Millions Against Monsanto. There are, Non-GMO South Carolina, Stop GMO South Carolina, and all these different groups exist, but they don't necessarily all work together. And this is bad strategy on our part. If we're against GMOs, then we all need to be working together in a united front. We can put all our numbers together, we can have a very big effect, and we can actually get a few wins in our column. And I think the United States, the American people, are willing to listen to that. I think most people, once they figure out what kind of food they're being fed and the alternative, which is real food, I think they always choose the real food, with very few exceptions. The most brainwashed people imaginable would support GMOs, but that's it. And I think this is something you could get popular traction on, and as long as these individuals and organizations are willing to unite, get a united front, and really march head on and get aggressive with this, I think they have a chance of bringing about some real and positive change. They've done it in other countries, and we can do it here.
So I really appreciate you coming on here and talking to us, Brandon. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Hey, this is JJ Inc., and when I'm on planet Earth, I listen to UCY.TV.